Okay, you ready to go?
Ready to go.
Let's do this. All right, so I wanted to start off with a less deep question here.
Okay.
One thing I have noticed, thank you for being here, by the way.
Glad to
It's,
be here.
it's honestly such an honor for you to be here talking to us. Um, One thing I notice you for is your consistency in the mornings when you're either jogging or running and stuff. I'm curious to know when you started doing that.
I started that probably 3 or 4 years ago. I'm not exactly certain on the time. May have been more than that. I did it on the advice, not the jogging part, but the walking part by my doctor because of some physical things.
Well, in case no one knows, I noticed you at the last time we did a 5K, and you were you were smoking the competition. So the consistency shows. I just thought it was interesting to see how you applied that every morning. You're consistent at it, and maybe we should all be doing that. Honestly,
Well, I just try to stay consistent, as you stated, and I try to stay consistent not only in that, but in whatever I do,
whatever you
whatever
do.
I put my mind to, whatever I want to accomplish. I try to show a consistency in it because I believe that is the thing that has made my life what it is today. And I was not necessarily going out there to beat everybody. And
Yeah.
I didn't beat everybody by any stretch. There were a number of them that came in ahead of me on the 5K, and others were saying, "Well, you ought to be able to win this." I said, "No, I'm not there to win this. I know I can't
Yeah.
at my age, but I'll certainly do my best."
It's
And
awesome.
that's what I did.
Good response to that consistency.
Yeah.
So I want you to go back. Sorry, I'm a little toasty in here. If you can, in your mind, go way back to growing up. I was curious to know if you grew up in church, something that kind of really stands out to you from your childhood.
Actually, I was born in Arkansas. My parents moved to Akron, Ohio, when I was about 8 months of age. And it was not until I was 4 years old that my parents got into the church. And what happened was my dad went to a revival by a child, actually. I don't know how old he was, but he was quite young. And they called him Little David. And he was the one preaching the revival at Akron Armory. And so he went, and that's the first time that he got into anything near Pentecost. And so from there, he was referred to a church, I suppose, because he went to a particular church, and it was there that he got into the church. He and my mother eventually both receiving the baptism of the Holy Ghost, being baptized in Jesus' name, of course. And and from that point, it was probably a fairly normal childhood. We lived in some government type apartments, but in time, my parents bought a home as I was getting towards my middle school age, as it is called today. It was called junior high at that point. So I grew up in a home where basically, really about all I ever knew was the church in my memory bank. A lot of this other I was told later on as far as my age and when they came into the church. But in my memory bank, the church is mainly what I remember.
And a lot of people talk about their testimony as in they were out in the world coming in. So what would you say to people that grew up in church thinking that they don't have a testimony?
I think you've got a great testimony, probably even greater than that of those that are in the world, and perhaps not, but I understand the greatness of the deliverance of God from habits and from any number of things that you could face in the world. But uh, I don't think that you could ever say that we don't have a testimony, because God has been good to me throughout that period of time and all throughout my life. And his goodness and the fact of what was instilled in me while I was young is something that has stayed with me throughout my life. Uh, Even though I made my share of mistakes, I did my share of wrongs, I'm not perfect by any stretch, but I'm glad that I was raised like I was.
That's good. So, growing up, we'll kind of stay there for a minute. What is one thing that just really doesn't really necessarily have to be a memory about the church, but as far as your family and all that goes, what's something that really you can fall back to and that really stands out to you?
Uh, I got a lot of memories. I'm not exactly certain what you're like there.
Something that really defined you. It kind of helped shape you today.
Okay, I can take that. I went into the service when I was 19 years of age.
Okay, let's talk about that.
And when I went into the service from Ohio, I never returned back there after I got out of the service. But and what really began to define me was the fact that I began to hear things preached, taught, that I had not heard before. Not that I didn't hear good things before, not that there wasn't anointing, not that there wasn't other things, but I began to develop in my walk as a young man, and even more so in years that followed after I got out of this service. I spent 2 years in the Army. It was there that I met my wife after being in service in a year, for a year. And then we married. She was with me for a year in the service. I only knew her 3 months when we got married. But here we are, staring 59 years in the face in October. So it's lasted all these years. God's been good to us. God's kept us, and we've just trusted him and kept him at the center of our marriage.
I want to come back to that for being married so long, because that's amazing right there. So in the military, were you ever, did you ever question your faith, or were you maybe a little lost, maybe as far as maybe ministry goes? When did you get your calling?
I didn't get my calling while I was young. I was older. When I say older, I was probably in mid to late 20s when God started dealing with me, and so, but yet there were things that were happening in my life that was preparing me for that point in time when God would call me. And I think that's how it happens with all of us. I don't think it's just boom, all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I understand we got scriptures where Samuel was called when he was just a child and everything, but he was in the temple, and of course he was under the leadership there in the temple. So he was in God's scope from the very beginning. I understand all that, but I feel like there were things that God had to do and prepare me for if I was going to enter into ministry, and teachable things that I needed to learn. And again, because of my exposure growing up, even though I was in the church, there were some things I wasn't exposed to.
That's good. So as a young minister, were you one of the ones that kind of just jumped into it, like, I got this? Or did it take longer to kind of develop that?
Well, let me go by saying this. When I got out of service, we moved to California, and it was there that we were in Vor Shoemake's church in San Jose, California. And I can't say immediately I began to feel the call. Again, I was quite young at that point in time. I was about 22 years of age at that time. but it was several years. But again, getting the preached word, evangelists that would come through, various ones, and praying and seeking for the will of God and the place that God would have me and use me, and singing in the choir even. My wife and I sang in the choir under Lanny Wolf. We did a lot of different things, and then Sunday school. I and my wife were the head of the primary department for a number of years. I did a lot of bus routes, bus ministry. So I'm very familiar with that and very successful in that. Throughout that period of time, we saw a number of people come into the church, several to pray through to the baptism of the Holy Ghost. So all of these things were preparing me, and then God began dealing with my heart. I didn't get a call like in a dream or just a voice out of heaven. I just felt the urgency. But let me share something else with you. I went in to talk to my pastor. At this period of time, Brother Vor Shoemake had retired from the pastoring. His son, Jimmy Shoemake, came in and had taken over. And so I went in to talk to Brother Shoemake, and Brother Shoemake at that time informed me, not to any fault of his own. I don't even want to give this illusion. I probably shouldn't even use names. But anyways, he said, I don't know if you're called into the ministry. And
So how did that make you feel?
so I thought, well, I'm going to go to prayer some more. I felt certain of it when I walked in there, and I just it didn't discourage me. All it did is cause me to go to pray and to be certain of my calling, and that's what I did. And then I talked to him later, and of course he was very supportive. And I want you to understand, he was very supportive of me being in the ministry. But at first, sometimes we can testify real well, but that doesn't mean you're called for pulpit ministry or even to pastor a church or be a missionary, whatever. I think perhaps at that time he felt like maybe that was my calling, just be strong and a pillar in the church and whatever. And I was okay with that if that was God's will for my life.
Wow. We could have gone off on to that for a while. Just one more question about ministry. As a young minister, what are some things, or maybe one thing that you kind of struggled with, and what would you say to ministers coming up currently?
And I know we're all different in that regard.
Yes.
I guess my biggest struggles at first, I had different ones putting into me, read this book, that book, this other book, and you need this and you need that. And of course you had to do certain things in order to get your license, local license, and then later on general license, and then ordination. So you had to go through certain steps, and you know that. Procedure. Of course, it's changed somewhat over the years, but there were certain things I did need to read, and I did read them, and again, I showed that type of consistency I've tried to follow and pattern all my life. And so I did that, but then other things, people would tell me to read, do this, do that. And I was praying, God, I want to know your will. I want my ministry to be about your word. And so God began to deal with me about not putting so much time in books as much as I would put into the word, that my ministry would be a word-focused ministry. And I believe that is what has kept me in the church, for one thing, because I have others who got so involved. I know others who got so involved in reading and studying this book and that thing, and they took their messages from this one and that one. And I'm not against learning. I'm not against reading books. I like to read. But I am just saying that God wanted me to mainly focus on his word, that I would put more time in his word than I would in all these other things. And so that's what I did for my ministry. I know T.F. Tenney He was very knowledgeable. Other men that have been, and their ministries were different than mine.
Mm-hmm.
So, but nonetheless, God helped me in that regard. That was where I struggled most at first.
So preach the word.
Yeah,
That's
preach
good.
the word.
So moving on from that, and what would you say, just before we end that, what would you say to a young minister that's coming up right now? What would be a piece of advice you would give them?
I believe we've really touched on it already.
Yes.
And that is that they need to learn a consistency in their life. That I don't think I could say anything any better than that. They need a dedicated life, a consistent life. And if they are not willing to be consistent in whatever they do, they're going to have problems. They're going to have struggles that they normally would not have otherwise. And so if they will develop that type of thing in their life, whatever direction God would lead them, then they will be able to follow in the path that He wants them to go in, and their ministry will blossom in the way that God has chosen for them.
Gotcha. That's good. So from that time in your life, and it might have been before this, I don't know, what is, and it could be multiple things, but what is a major, maybe mountain that you had to cross that really defined your life? I say mountain that you had to climb, maybe the lowest valley you had to be in, if you don't mind sharing.
Could I go back before ministry with
sure.
this? My older brother had his first child, and then his second child was born at 6 months of age. I was holding the baby, and the next day the baby died crib death. And it was very upsetting to all of the family, to myself, just thinking about that. That was the first time death had really stricken us close in that manner. And I was very upset with it. And then later on, my wife and I were expecting our first child. We were very excited about it, as would be normally the case. And just to cut it short, the baby was born, and I went to work the next day, just everything seemingly okay. And then my brother-in-law called about mid-morning, if I recall right, and said the baby was dying and that I needed to get to the hospital. And so I left work, and I got to the hospital as quickly as I could. And of course, the baby passed shortly after I got there. Of course, that was devastating to my wife and myself. And being our first child, such high hopes, and not that any death wouldn't be devastating to a family. And of course, I had to go through that, and my wife was still in the hospital. I had to prepare for the burial and whatever. And then I remember the first time I went to church, and I think this helped define me and even later on my ministry in a sense. I went to church, and I looked around me. Everybody was shouting, worshiping, and I had been a worshiper, but at that time I didn't feel like worshiping. And in fact, I was hurting so that when I saw them doing this, I thought, don't you understand what's just happened? In my thoughts, I didn't voice that, and I never have even said it, I don't even think, to my wife. But I was just wondering what's going on here. But I soon put that behind me. And I say soon, I mean, I never remember that ever happening again or coming to my mind again. And so it was, I believe, after that my brother, the older brother that lost that child, he and his wife had twins, and word got to us that both of them had died. And when I received that word, I became angry. We were in California at this time, and and it's the only time, I believe I'm saying this right, the only time I've ever questioned God. And I wondered why, you know, and it wasn't for my sake, but it was for my brother's sake that I cried that out. I wondered, why would he have to go through all of this? And, but that was the only time. And I soon, again, put it behind me. Again, I'm talking about in preparation for ministry and for my life and what I would follow as a pattern throughout my life. I just didn't allow myself to dwell in areas and places where I might go into deeper despair and whatever. And so I was able to use that later on when pastoring and ministering to others that went through maybe not the exact same thing, maybe not as much, maybe more. And so I would be able to minister to them. So God has a reason for allowing certain things. I'm not saying the twins died because of that or anything. I'm not even saying our child died entirely because of that, but I'm saying we can use these things, whatever has happened to us. And I know you've had a very traumatic event happen to you as a child. I believe those things help mold us, form us to be a better or a bitter individual.
That's good. Better or bitter. That's real good. So come out of that. I'm just trying to unpack all this. That was so good. What would you say to someone that is going through this right now, or has gone through this and hasn't really gotten over it yet?
You know, it's hard to say because we all grieve differently. I know that's been said, but again, I think you got to make a choice. You got to make a choice. I want to come out of this more than anything else. And by God's help, I can come out of it. I realize it's not under my own power, my own strength, but I've got to have God. So I think I would advise them that they would just look to the Lord and help them. And I know sometimes that sounds cliched or whatever. And that's not how I mean it at all, but I believe it in truth. You know, some may say that's not the right thing to say, but really that's what helped me. My walk with God, as I developed, as I sought after God, as I didn't let that dampen me down and continue to keep me down in my worship, in my praise, and my seeking after God. And I came out of it a lot faster than some do. And I'm not patting myself on the back. I don't mean to sound like that. I'm not. But I think that you can come out of it if you determine by God's help it's possible. Again, I haven't been through what you've been through. I don't know all, you know, I can't say to that because I wasn't a child and lost my dad or anything. But I believe God will help you or whoever.
That's good. So, wow, what a testimony there. I want to kind of transition to it because you kind of touched on it a little bit, and something that me personally have noticed from you is your prayer walk, just your consistency. And this is going to be a hard question, a very loaded question. What makes a good prayer life?
Consistency.
I
think this whole time conversation is centered, or the center of this is the fact that you've got to be consistent in anything and everything you do, and prayer in particular, because prayer is communication with God. And if He's my friend, or if He's my Father, you know, which He is, and He's a friend that sticketh closer than a brother, and of course I'm a child of God's, why wouldn't I want to talk with Him? Why wouldn't I want to communicate with him? Why would I not make it a consistent time that I would go to prayer and seek after God? I've learned that I can make excuse if I want to, like anybody else, but I have tried over the years not to allow that to become something that would define me. Consistency is what I want to define my life, and I want it to define my prayer life. And I believe also in praying that it has to be in that I want to touch God. I want him to talk to me. And I know I haven't always given him the opportunity. You know, I'm just like everybody else. I want this, I want that, and everything. But I also have learned that it's better if I give more praise, more honor, more thanksgiving. You know, that I'm apt to hear from God. And there are some times when God spoke to me and I've done certain things and they were proved out to that he actually had spoken these things to me.
Wow. Consistency.
Yeah.
So now, you know, you've made it through all that. I would say, you know, in the short amount of years that I've known you, that you have, I can't say this a testament that you have remained consistent. I've never seen you change. So now, you know, is there something that you still want to do? Is there something that maybe you want to leave behind for people to be helped by? Something like that. What's kind of going through your
I
head?
guess the thing I would like to do most is to be able to reach some more souls, teach some more Bible studies, impact some more lives. And however that might be accomplished, it's not always in the pulpit that you accomplish those
True.
things. I do teach the adult class. I have on occasion preached or taught mainly since I've been in Texas, and even going back to Virginia to visit, I've preached there a number of times. But what do I want to accomplish? I think it's just whatever God wills for my life at this point, because he knows better what time I have.
Yeah.
And he knows better the strength I have. I think I know, but I found out a few weeks ago things can go haywire real fast. So
I think you're a living testimony to it doesn't matter what age you are, you can still make such a big impact if you remain consistent, like you said.
I pray so.
So,
I pray so.
Hey, is there anything else that you wanted to leave us, or besides remaining consistent? That's going to stick with me.
Well, you know, I know that sounds very simple, and again, it could sound sort of cliched, whatever, but I'm telling you the truth when I say that, because I see so much inconsistency in our world today, and even in our churches. I am proud of our young people.
So you said you were ending on the youth. How you're proud of their
Yeah,
consistency.
I'm very proud of our youth at Family Church, and it seems like they stay together. I haven't noticed any cliques to the point where that they just, you know, don't seem to communicate with one another and all. And I think that's excellent. But I don't know what all that has to do with my ministry, but
hey, you never know.
But nonetheless, I am encouraged by that in our church. I am encouraged by the fact that that we have a great pastor. We do. We have a great pastor and bishop. So I don't know. Again, why I come over to that, but we
can't say it enough.
we're glad we're where we are at this point in my ministry.
That's good. Well, sorry about the little technical error there. Thank you for being here today. I hope someone gets. I know I have something out of this, and thank you for being here.
Well, it's my pleasure, and thank you for asking me.